Have you ever been playing Left 4 Dead 2 and come across something strange, something you can't quite explain? Well, today I'm going to be searching for and discovering more mysteries in Left 4 Dead 2. I have a Discord community that's very welcoming and friendly, so feel free to use the link in the description or in the pinned comment. Like always, if we hit 1,000 likes, I'll be posting some baby bunny pictures on my community tab. We recently hit 20,000 subs. I want to thank you guys so much. It means the world to me. But without any further distractions, let's jump straight into the dark and disturbing mysteries of Left 4 Dead 2. There are many recognizable campaigns in Left 4 Dead 2, however the campaign Dead Center is particularly popular among the community, typically for those who play versus. But what if I told you the very first map of Dead Center held one of my most personal favorite mysteries? You see, as the players spawn into the map, they make their way down the Savannah Hotel, only to realize it's on fire. What caused the fire? Was it intentional? Was it an accident? Did it start before or after our survivors arrived? Let's analyze some of those questions. The first one I want to try and answer is the how. How did this fire begin in the first place? Since there's so much of it, in the beginning it felt like a pretty daunting task. However, I noticed a very small detail that would assist in narrowing down the cause. The very top level has barely any fire, but as you go down the floors, the amount of fire begins to increase. A pretty simple detail, but an extremely important one. The fire must have started on a floor lower than that at which we started on. Imagine a piece of paper 100 feet long by 100 feet wide. If you started a fire directly in the middle and let it expand for minutes, it would generally spread even in all directions. And as you trace back the burned parts of the paper, you make your way to the center, you'll begin to realize that the more destruction you have, the closer you get to the source. Now, there can always be other variables like explosives that might cause bigger damage as the fire grows, and other factors like thickness, coating, or wind. Try not to overanalyze what I'm trying to convey, but we'll just use this information as a general rule of thumb. Turning our attention back to Dead Center, we find the most destruction and fire at the very bottom of the hotel. As the elevator doors open, our survivors are met with a giant cloud of smoke. Coughing and wheezing their way out of the elevator, they notice the entire lobby is set ablaze. With no time to linger, they hurry through the hallway and maneuver their way through the kitchen, narrowly avoiding the flames. With so much fire at this bottom level, it makes it hard to pinpoint the exact start of the fire, but I definitely know it started on this floor. Before jumping to any conclusions, I decided to search through Reddit to find if anyone had a good guess. A lot of people pointed out the kitchen, explaining it was probably a gas leak that really got it going. There were many individuals passing through here in order to get to the chopper, so in all the commotion, it's possible someone caused an accident in the kitchen, where one thing led to another, resulting in the massive fire. It's also possible it was caused by the infected. They could have bumped something over and started it that way, but the more interesting theory is that it was started intentionally. It's possible that as people made their way through the lobby and lower levels, they realized just how many infected there were, opting to start the fire to try and slow them down, but unfortunately we know this didn't work because there's infected on every floor of the hotel, as you can find out by exploring. Another possibility is the fact that someone could have just chucked a molly into one of the rooms on the bottom floor, starting the fire that way, but there's not a crazy amount of concrete evidence. If there's anything I missed, let me know, but let's move on to the next section. I'm gonna ask you to hear me out on this next section. I'm gonna sound borderline schizophrenic. Just try and follow what I'm saying for a second, believe me. In the first chapter of No Mercy, our survivors find themselves in an apartment complex that's populated with a bunch of different assets. Among those assets are a couple of paintings, but they all have one thing in common with each other. That's the number of things shown in each painting. Each one of them references the number 4. Take this painting with flowers in a jar. There's a few petals on the ground, but inside the case sits 4 flowers. The next painting is an owl. It's sitting on a branch while holding 4 rats in its claws. This painting shows a beautiful landscape with, look at that, 4 mountains in the background. This painting of a window is a bit of a stretch, but the light in the background is split in 4 ways. As we head down the stairs, the trend continues. This painting of a house has 4 bushes in its yard. The painting of a sitting pig has 4 apples next to it. This painting of a barn has 4 sheep. This floral painting has 4 big petals. And lastly, this sunset painting has 4 birds on its beach. I know what you're screaming at me, Cookie, hop back on your meds, it's for your own good. But in all honesty, I swear I'm not the only one who thinks all the references to the number 4 are kind of weird. I might have watched a video somewhere or read it a long time ago, but while playing around in a private match, I noticed the references. If you know someone who made a video or someplace that references this, let me know, please, because I sound like a schizo and my entire Discord doesn't believe me. What specifically could these paintings be referencing? As in, what does the number 4 mean in terms of these depictions? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind are the survivors. There's 4 of them. The painting that stood out to me the most was the one with the birds on the beach. Something about it just has this vibe, one of despair and loneliness, yet one of extreme persistence and pride. In a way, all of these paintings are their own metaphors for the survivors, some more than others of course. The floral one could be a bit hard to explain, as well as the mountain and the window one, but looking back at the sunset painting, it reminds me of Blood Harvest, where after such hardship our survivors finally reach the military, heading off into the sunset, until they find out the military plan is a bust, only to be right back where they started, just like these birds, chilling on a beach, unsuspecting of something like a wave. Am I looking too much into this? Am I turning into a crazy over-analyzing Left 4 Dead YouTuber? Yes, but if anything's clear to me, it's that Left 4 Dead has a bunch of details hidden right under our noses. The Last Stand body is a reference to an Easter egg in the campaign The Last Stand. There's not a crazy amount here, so I'll try to keep this section on the shorter side. As our survivors gather themselves, they make their way under a bridge and eventually come across this house next to the water. They go up the stairs and drop down to continue going on their way. However, if you instead jump down and turn to your right and head to the back portion of the house, you'll find this oddly colored door. And if the player decides to whack it with a melee weapon, after a minute or so it'll break down, revealing a special room. Inside the room sits a single dead man. Next to him lies a computer that's still on, and if you interact with the keyboard on the desk, you'll get a golden crowbar, which is a reference to the Half-Life games. Just like Jimmy Gibbs, although it's an Easter egg, it exists in a physical form within the map, so trying to find an in-universe explanation is something that I like to do. Some might call it an overanalyzation, and to that I say, nuh-uh. But jokes aside, what, if any, could be the lore behind this? How'd he die? Why is he here? Well, a possible explanation could be a makeshift safe room. I believe this man was probably the owner of this house. There's a possibility it was someone random, but who knows. Whoever this is, fearing the infection, they hid in this room to try and wait it out for as long as possible, eventually realizing they need resources like food and water in order to survive. So they go ahead and open the door, only in one way or another, to contract the green flu. Fearing the worst, they nailed the door shut out of fear or losing their mind, just to die anyways. There's a few problems with this, like why is he actually dead and not a living infected? It's possible he starved to death once he turned into the infected. However, there's another more simpler theory that I think is pretty funny. The possibility that this man was so deep into his work on his computer, he didn't even realize the infection was a thing and just died. This doesn't explain the closed door, but at this point I've already looked too deep into it. Was this man a scaredy cat? Did he work himself to death? Whatever the in-universe case is, we may never know for sure. As our survivors stand on top of the apartment building at the beginning of the No Mercy campaign, they catch a glimpse of the helicopter as it passes by, and hear it mention Mercy Hospital. From there, our survivors decide it's their best bet, so they make their way to the hospital, fighting through giant hordes on their way there. The survivors go on to find a radio at the top of Mercy Hospital and use it to contact a helicopter pilot. This pilot has a lot of lore behind him, and I'll talk about that in the future, but what I want to try and focus on is a few levels beforehand. You see, in the third third chapter of No Mercy, if you make your way out of the sewers, you pop out right out of this manhole. To your left is the entrance to Mercy Hospital. However, if you clear out the zombies and are able to wait for a bit, you might notice something strange. Super high up, you can spot the helicopter pilot from earlier fly towards the top of the building, stay up there for a bit, and then leave. It's a super subtle detail that not a lot of people will notice, but an interesting one nonetheless. Why is the helicopter pilot up there? Is he saving a group of people? Is he just checking out the area? Let's try and figure out these questions. Before we jump into that, however, it's important to note the way the scene is rendered, because the player is never really supposed to be up there. The entire thing is rendered similarly to the skybox. Valve utilizes a lot of 3D skyboxes, and this could definitely be a part of that. Why is this so important? Well, 3D skyboxes in Left 4 Dead aren't explorable, meaning if you approach them in any way, they disappear. Another detail worth noting, at the bottom of the Left 4 Dead maps, you can find a smaller version of the 3D skybox, so analyzing that might be a little bit easier, but due to the miniature scale, it can make it really hard to point out the finer details. So for the sake of capturing footage and research, we'll have to observe this scene from a distance. Jumping back a little bit, what are some speculations and educated guesses we can make using context clues and other examples throughout Left 4 Dead? The first thing that comes to mind was that the helicopter pilot had just picked up another group of survivors. This makes sense for multiple reasons. The first is that he stops at the very top. This could be to allow survivors to board the helicopter, just as we do later in the campaign, before eventually taking off. Another piece of evidence could be found in that last chapter that I just mentioned, where our survivors arrive at the top, they talk to the helicopter pilot, asking for a pickup. He responds by saying he needs a couple minutes, which our survivors use to hold off the infected. It's possible that it's taking him this long due to the other group of survivors that he just picked up, needing time to drop them off before heading back to the rooftop. It could be that the helicopter pilot was just searching the area and happened to be far away at that specific point in time, but it does tie in nicely to what I've talked about previously. The only thing that contradicts this theory is how much time he'd actually need. When the helicopter pilot takes our survivors to safety, he attempts to take them to Riverside, or at least that's what I think. I've tried looking it up on the wiki, but I can't find anything concrete. Let me know if that's not where he was taking them, but that's where I believe he was heading to. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. My only point is that wherever he was heading to is pretty far. So if he were to pick up survivors beforehand, he'd need a bunch of time. But by the time we see him at the end of the third chapter and then again at the end of the fifth, I'd argue it's enough time to pick up and drop off a group of people wherever they would want. Who knows, it's hard to say what he's really doing due to the lack of concrete evidence. His actions might have to remain a mystery for now. The Sacrifice Shipyard is a reference to an interesting detail you can come across in Left 4 Dead 2. In the Sacrifice campaign, our survivors can come across a boat stuck in some shallow water. There's a boat that looks oddly familiar. On the side of the boat, you can find the word St. Lydia 2. This happens to be the exact boat that picked up our survivors at the end of Death Toll. Same shape, same colors, same name. For the longest time, I thought this was nothing more than a cool little reference, but then I remembered that both of these campaigns are canon, so it is in fact the same boat, not just a reused asset. It's also worth noting that a duplicate of this ship can be found a couple feet away. However, this one's name is purposefully hidden, so although it's the same asset, I believe they still intended it to be the ship from Death Toll, but also just reused the asset over here. Now that we've established it's the same boat that's in Death Toll, I've got a couple questions. What happened to it? How did it end up here? And what happened to the couple who owned the boat? Let's start with that last question. For those of you who don't know, the St. Lydia 2 was a boat operated and owned by a couple who stayed in the boathouse at the end of Death Toll. That's who you make contact with when you pick up the radio. The last our survivors see of the boat before the sacrifice is right before the campaign Dead Air, where in the Sacrifice comic, Francis states they were robbed by the couple and thrown off the boat. I think it's safe to say that these people had whatever happened to them coming. The most interesting part about finding the boat is just how far it would have had to travel to get here. Death Toll is the third campaign chronologically, so coming across the same same boat in the very last campaign isn't crazy or anything. The couple definitely had time to drive it down here, but just for reference, Death Toll took place in Pennsylvania, whereas the Sacrifice takes place in Georgia. So this couple had to virtually travel down the entire east coast of the United States. A pretty crazy feat, but how'd they do it? Well, it's not hard to look at a map and guess, but they probably hugged the coastline, stopping wherever they could to find supplies to continue their journey. The infection started where they left, so if they started traveling south right after they dropped off our survivors, there's a chance they might have been ahead of the infection. Maybe not in every case, but it would allow them to travel such a distance without as much risk as our survivors. But we know they definitely encountered the infected here in the Sacrifice. One important detail I want to point out is that this boat has a spotlight. It's powered on and pointed at the ground nearby. I'm assuming this is a battery powered spotlight, so it couldn't have been long since the boat arrived, or else whatever was powering this light would have been shut off. Another interesting detail is that there's no opening. You can't see the ocean from where this boat is, meaning that once the boat entered this area, some event took place causing it to be blocked in. I mentioned earlier that the water is super shallow, so how'd the boat get in here? Well, it probably entered at high tide, and as the tide lowered, it got stuck. It's also possible that whatever event caused all of this junk to pile up took place after it got beached, but we can't really tell. The only question I have left is, what happened to the couple? The only bit of evidence I could find is this bloodstain, and occasionally loot can spawn next to it. They could have tried to defend the boat but got overrun. If the tide rose, I would see all this evidence getting washed away, so that could mean two things. It happened literally within a couple of hours of our survivors getting here, or the tide was stopped at some point. It's possible that the tide was initially low, all the junk at the entrance then blocked this area, not allowing the water to rise in this zone, but still being able to rise perfectly fine on the other side. What really happened to this couple? Did they both perish? Is one still alive? Unfortunately, this might have to remain a mystery forever. If you have a mystery that you would like me to talk about, let me know by commenting it, and if I use it, I'll shout you out in a future video. I don't know how many more of these videos I'll make, but I want to try and figure out as many mysteries as I can. Please remember to join the public Discord server, and again, if we hit 1,000 likes, I'll post some baby bunny pictures on my community tab, so make sure you're subscribed so you can see them on your feed. Have a nice rest of your day. Peace out.